Hi, Shevon. No, I'm here right now. Just put Kevin on. Are you in the right one? It's the one for 6 o'clock. I sent it to your phone. Okay, do it. Come back in. Come back in again while I got you on the phone. Hey, Kevin. Shevon is trying to get in. Hold on. And then Shevon, if you turn on your video, we're doing a big screen. Let me make sure the camera's ready. Yeah, I gotta give you, yeah, I see 3 participants. Hold on, it didn't come up, admit you. Hold on. All right, I'm gonna get off the phone now. I'm admitting you. Okay. Hi, Shevon. You're muted. No, there you go. How are you?
Hello?
Yes, can you hear me?
I don't know, I can barely hear you.
I can hear you good. Kevin, can you hear
I
her?
don't know. It's
Yeah, I hear you fine.
Okay.
yeah, I can't hear anything.
Turn your volume up. We can hear you.
Should I leave and come back in to see if that'll work?
Try it. I can hear you. You can't hear you.
I'm gonna try to leave and come back in.
Okay. All right, so she's gonna try again. And then before, I'm gonna make sure, there she goes. There, is that better? We can hear you.
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Okay, perfect. So Shevon, how are you feeling? Are you ready to tell your story as brilliantly as you did?
I could try. I've been up for 24 hours straight.
I'm gonna see, let me see if I can change the way the screen presents, because I want when you're talking that you are,
Okay.
it's gonna be speaker view. There we go.
Okay.
Okay. View, speaker view. Yep, it's on speaker view. So say something, Shevon, so it can go to you.
How about now? Is it working?
Yes. Okay, that's perfect. All right, Shevon, so give me a second. I'm gonna move out of the camera's way.
Okay.
That's perfect. That's perfect. I'm gonna move a bit out of the camera's way. And then I'm gonna introduce who we are. So I'll introduce myself. Kevin will introduce himself. And we'll introduce the podcast. This is Yesterday, Today. And we are doing the HFAN, Homes for All Newark podcast today. Okay, so
Okay.
let me get ready. I'm gonna start the recording. Okay, sorry for the interruption. Hi, I'm Helene Freeman. I'm a founding member of Homes for All Newark. And this is Yesterday, Today. It's a podcast that we do. I do it in conjunction with Kevin. Kevin, introduce yourself.
Hola, my name's Kevin Tanak. I'm a teacher over at Eastside High School for about 7 years now, and also a longtime member of Homes for All Newark.
And our special guest today is Shevon Torres. Shevon has a really gripping and interesting story about the impact of lead on her family. So Shevon, can you introduce yourself and then give us the information as you relate it to lead-free New Jersey?
Okay. Well, my name is Shevon Torres, and my story happened about 10 years ago. It started off with my nephew going to get a regular checkup, and they did the usual lead testing. And it came back that he had lead poisoning. So we ended up having the rest of our children in the house tested. My oldest son came back; he was fine. My youngest son was borderline lead, having lead poisoning at extremely high levels, and one of my nieces did as well. After they got lead tested, we got about a couple weeks ago, a week after, we got a phone call from the Board of Health, and they decided they was going to do the testing on our house to see where the lead was coming from. This happens in a small town, Mount Holly. They tested the lead, the floor paint, the window sills, and all of it had high concentrations of lead. We didn't know there was lead in the house when we first moved in, and it's really upsetting to think about what could have happened. The Board of Health director came to our house and was telling us we needed to have all the paint removed, the windows changed, so on and so forth. And then when we try to get money up for it, we lived below the poverty line. We didn't have money for that. And then on top of that, because the house was considered historic, we couldn't do any changes to the house without permission from the Historical Society first. The Board of Health decided to give us historical resources to help us get funding to get the lead removed. We went to these resources. Either they said we made too much or we didn't make enough, so nobody would help us. We went to the Board of Social Services. Nobody could help us at that point. And then it started becoming more of a harassment. The director of the Board of Health kept coming to our house, and we're telling them we don't have the money for it. The resources that you're giving us is not help. They're not helping us. What else can we do? And it got to the point he was coming on almost every other day, and it was frustrating my grandmother. And my grandmother just told him, like, don't come here anymore. We don't have the money right now. Don't come here. So he took it upon himself to call Child Protective Services. I was actually working 2 jobs at the time, 2 full-time jobs, to try to save up money to get the house repaired. And I get a phone call from my job saying that the people from Child Protective Services are in front of my house, and if I'm not there, they're gonna take my children. So I had to leave work early, which I ended up losing my job because I had to leave work. And luckily, the social worker was a Black woman, very nice woman. She actually told us, like, if she called me, because if she put my children in that van, they officially became part of the state, and it'd have been hard to get my children back. And they know we didn't do anything wrong or harm our children for them to take us. Mm-hmm. We had nowhere to go. My brother's kids ended up going with their mother's grandmother. My sister took my 2 boys, and even that put her at jeopardy because she lived in low income housing. And if they found out my sister and my kids there, she would have lost her housing with her child. And this went on for a long time, and we ended up losing the house. My grandmother worked years to try to get, it was started to be a rental owned house, and she worked her behind off to try to get this house. And because of all of this, and we ended up going in foreclosure, my grandma lost her house. So essentially, I was living out of my car for years. I went to the Boards of Social Services asking for help. They told me they would help me, but my sons were too old to stay at a women's shelter with me. So they told me I would have to go to a women's shelter, and my 12-year-old son would have to go to an adult men's shelter in Camden by himself.
That's horrific. That just
And,
doesn't make any sense.
and I told him I'm not going to do that. My son goes to school. Well, why would I leave my 12-year-old son in Camden alone? I said, I'm not going to do that. And because I refused to do that, they said I was not complying. So they refused to help us. We were couch surfing for a few years, and I recently got some stable housing this past November. It'll be a year in November. And all this stemmed from the lead poisoning and not having the information about the lead in the house and not having the resources, even though they claimed those resources for us. And all this stemmed from, like, I could have lost my children. My sister could have lost her housing. We were homeless for years on top of that. My grandmother, we ended up having to go to senior housing and pretty much lost everything because she put so much money into the house.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a lot of it played a part, what had to do with race, because they told us we couldn't change anything without their permission. But recently, the same house, they did a complete workover on the inside, modernized everything when they told us we weren't allowed to.
This is really problematic. Hearing this, Homes for All, we advocate for affordable housing for everyone. Here in the city of Newark, we're part of a national organization, but a lot of people think, oh, well, I go to South Jersey, everything's so much better. You're in South Jersey, in Mount Holly, doing rent to own. And because it was considered a historic building, nobody advised you properly that you could have gone to New Jersey Legal Services, and you did.
We went to legal services. They said there was nothing that much we could do, and as long as the historical society said that we could not make any changes, there was nothing they could do because the house was deemed historic.
And
so,
but you see that that's a lie because you've gone back and you've looked and you've seen this. I think this is something that you might revisit.
Yes, it's been about 9-10 years since that happened, and honestly, I do think that the fact that we were low income, that we are a marginalized community, did play a part. A lot of people don't understand, like during Brunswick County, it's like Mount Holly is really segregated.
Yes.
And where we lived was Madison Avenue, and Black people wasn't allowed to move there until like the late 80s, early 90s. And we were one of the first Black families to come in there, and it was a problem. And the fact that we weren't doctors, we didn't have money on top of that, like money on top of money, and we lived below the poverty line, I think was the issue. And honestly, I think they just basically wanted us out of the house because it came to the point where the board, the Department of Health that was supposed to be there to help us did nothing. It got to the point where they're harassing us, like, you have to do this, you have to do this. And we're telling them we don't have the money, all the resources. We had a binder this thick full of resources. Nobody could help us.
That's ridiculous.
Yes.
Really ridiculous.
We other places wouldn't help us because we were not in their county. Other places we didn't make enough. Once we were $2 over one of the limits, so they wouldn't help us, because I got the second job. It was $2 over, so they wouldn't help us. Another place we were $10 under, and because of that, they wouldn't help us. So I wanted to share the story because there's people like me that fall in the cracks, that make too much to get help, but don't make enough to survive. And the fact is, like, and it bothers me because another issue they think might be linked to the lead is because my nephew that had lead poisoning, and Donovan, my son, that had high levels borderline lead poisoning, they're both also diagnosed autistic, and they think that might have had the lead might have had to play a part. And I noticed that with my son, with his autism and the way he was thinking differently, the schools wanted to deem him as a problem child or an issue. They wanted to put him in special ed, which when he took the test, his IQ was off the charts, but he refused to take the test, and all of a sudden he was a problem. And now he needed to be in special ed. And this makes me think of how many other children went through this, that suffers through this without even knowing, and automatically deemed as a problem child or special ed when they don't need to be placed there. And the fact that they're being labeled as a problem child follows them through school and is a direct correlation from the school to prison pipeline.
Exactly, Shevon, exactly. You're exactly right. I have an article from the Pew that I shared with you, and it said cutting lead poison and public cost. And it talked about the dramatic improvements, like city of Newark has a lead water crisis where lead lines were feeding into homes and causing lead contamination. But there's also lead in paint in some of the older buildings, and there's just reams of paint on top of paint. So those are problems. And it says that infants are often poisoned through the water because their parents mix their formula with the water from the tap. Whereas children over 6 often have lead poisoning, also from water contamination, but through the lead paint and eating paint chips. Here in the city of Newark, in 2014, 2015, it was discovered that there were lead lines going into the schools, and then they stopped children from drinking out of the water fountains. But there's been an ongoing issue here. And then your story shows that the lead issue is statewide. We're having an issue up north, you're having an issue down south. But the
lead was also found in the soil in the yards where our kids were playing in.
Yes,
as well.
Has that issue across the city. We are a Superfund site. There are many Superfund sites throughout the city, and contaminated groundwater from old condemned wells here. So we do have dioxin in the soil, and we also have lead. And that's from when there was leaded gasoline, and it would burn off and through the atmosphere, and through the rain, it's leached into the soil. But in the Pew article, it talks about they've made improvements over the past 30 years, but lead poisoning still remains a hazard for thousands of children across the country. But also
I'm sorry. Let me cut it short. There was an emergency that happened about the issue I was saying about earlier with the young woman.
Yes.
So they're for their Atlantic County. I'm so sorry. So I have to make sure we get there so she'd be able to get home. She'd be shipped over an hour away.
Not a problem, Shevon. We have your story. And then Kevin and I will discuss it. Thank you for taking the time, and thank you for being so conscientious and going back to your client.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Shevon. Have a good one.
We need to talk. Maybe we can work something out,
Definitely. I will give you a call.
Thanks, Shevon.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye. So Kevin, Shevon had to go back to work. She has been up with a client for 24 hours, and she's dedicated. And this woman is dedicated to helping people. And you heard her story that it appears that the family was targeted to get them out of this historic house that had been in a predominantly white area, and that it was transitioning. So it's sort of like reverse gentrification. This is an area, and they were trying to keep people out. And the head of the health department actually coming out is unheard of. Like, our health department heads have never come to people's homes. So this is a very telling story. Now, Kevin, in the article that I was referencing, I was talking to Shevon about, the Pew article indicates that the high cost of lead poisoning is lower IQs, cognitive and behavioral problems, what Shevon was saying, that most likely potentiates and feeds the school to prison pipeline. Also, a new study finds continuing risk, especially the low-income children who have older housing with lead paint and potential for significant costs for reduced rates of lead exposure. People generally can't afford to continue to buy water. A lot of these marginalized communities, they don't have the money to paint. They came into a building. In Shevon's case, it was a house. Evidently, it was sold to her grandmother with no lead safe certification. And so what Homes for All is doing now is going out into the Newark community. We're going to go door to door and speak to the members of the community about their housing. And if in fact they have lead safe certification, and if in fact that they have had their lead line abated. So Kevin, any input on that Pew article? Because without even her having it prior, I spoke with her two weeks ago when she first told her story to Lead Free New Jersey. And Shevon touched on these issues, the lower IQ and the cost, the human cost and the cost to the community. These are children lost. And you as a teacher, can you give me some insight? What do you think of the article, and what do you think about what Shevon said?
Yeah, I mean, the article reminds me of the struggle that the Newark Education Workers Caucus had, fought for years to basically get the, Newark Public Schools and City of Newark to, recognize the fact that the lead lines were contaminated, not just in the schools, but in the city more generally. So that, refers back to the lawsuit that, I guess the Newark Education Workers Caucus had signed on to with NRDC. But besides that, specifically what Shevon was saying reminded me of just the fact that, kind of like what you were saying about the gentrification, that, there are a lot of people who are being kicked out of their homes, and, it's not because they can't afford it, but it's because they're not being given what they need to be able to stay in their homes. But then all of a sudden, once they get kicked out, somebody else gets everything that they need to stay in the same exact place that they just get kicked out of. So again, it just reminds me of, those two issues in terms of the importance of fighting gentrification and what the Newark Education Workers Caucus did.
And that's an excellent point. But what's so angering is they came to Shevon, gave her all these resources, air quote, resources. And when she would call, no aid whatsoever, no assistance. So that's something that we need to look at, that we need to test the resources that we're giving to people, and then making sure that we follow up Homes for All during our community survey of housing, that we're following up with residents to make sure that in fact these resources are working for them, answering when they call, and that they have access to all of this. So I think it falls back the ball is back in our court, it falls back on us, that we had to make sure that the resources are working. Anything else, Kevin? Kevin, are you still with us?
Yeah, I was going to say that I agree with what you said about the importance of us making sure that we're giving out information and resources that, we've done the legwork to validate ourselves, because at the end of the day, what we say is only as good as how well it works, or how well it walks. You know what I mean? In other words, we can't just be referring to things or giving out numbers that at the end of the day lead to nowhere.
Exactly. And we need to check back with our resources. If they say that they're coming out, who the organizations we're partnering with, that they say, oh yeah, we're coming out, we're going to do lead abatement, that they're actually testing and that the abatement is taking place. So Kevin, I think we really explored a lot on this. If we get more feedback, or people want to hear more from Shevon, we can have her back as a guest moving forward. But I think that wraps it up for us today. Yesterday, today, Helene Freeman, Kevin Signac, all from Homes for All. And we thank you all for listening to our podcast. Thanks, Kevin.
Yeah, that person was really cool. She said a lot of great information.
No, it's not funny.
And seriously, thanks
I'm
for
trying to end the meeting, Kevin. It's saying we want to hear more, but we got to go. This is the end of the podcast.